Something remarkable happened this week, and Washington hates that you noticed. In a town built on secrecy, silence, and carefully staged press conferences, one man did the unthinkable. He ripped the curtain open. Zohran Mamdani didn't just criticize the political establishment, he exposed the machinery they've been hiding behind for decades. Suddenly, the insiders, the lobbyists, the consultants, the career politicians, all of them are sweating. Because when someone names the backroom deals, the fundraising networks, the quiet favors traded behind closed doors, that's when the whole ecosystem panics. And here's the part they fear the most. Mamdani didn't expose one deal. He exposed the pattern, the blueprint, the way power actually works in this country when no one is watching. This isn't just a political moment. This is a fault line. And after this, nothing stays buried. Let's start with the moment everything cracked open, because this wasn't just a speech, and it wasn't just a bold comment. What Zohran Mamdani did was something far more dangerous to the political class. He told the truth they never say out loud. And he didn't whisper it. He didn't soften it. He didn't wrap it in some polite legislative language. He said it plainly, the way people talk at their kitchen tables, not in committee rooms. Mamdani pulled back the curtain on something that every insider knows but would rather die than admit, that so many legislative decisions, foreign policy votes, real estate carve-outs, budget line items, are shaped not by public debate, not by moral conviction, not even by political ideology, but by private conversations with donors, consultants, and friends of the party. Conversations that were never meant to see sunlight. And that's why this moment matters. Because Mamdani didn't expose a single scandal. He exposed the template. He showed the mechanism that turns public office into a private negotiation. When he described these informal agreements, lawmakers giving one lobby a small favor here, another lobby a quiet exemption there, he wasn't making an accusation. He was describing how power operates on an average Tuesday in American politics. The reason Washington, Albany, and every state capital panicked is because he said the one thing you're not supposed to say. The deals are happening before the votes, and the real decisions are being made outside the room. Think of how politics is supposed to work. There's debate, there's transparency, there's accountability. Now compare that to the reality Mamdani just exposed. Real estate moguls whisper privately about zoning flexibility, and magically, a carve-out appears in the housing bill. A foreign policy lobby expresses concern, and suddenly a representative who campaigned on restraint votes to expand military funding. Consultants line up their preferred candidates, and party leadership mysteriously shifts endorsements. None of this is written down. None of this is recorded. But it all shapes your life, your taxes, your neighborhood, your future. And this isn't new. You don't have to believe Mamdani. History has already shown it. Remember Bridgegate? A backroom deal about political loyalty that literally shut down a bridge. The Pentagon revolving door? Generals retire on Friday and appear on defense contractor boards by Monday. PAC bundling schemes? Money laundering with a patriotic smile. These aren't stories, they are patterns. And Mamdani's real threat is that he connected these patterns to present-day politics in real time. The political class calls this protocol. The public calls it what it is, corruption with a necktie on. And that's why his statement wasn't just bold, it was a direct breach of the unwritten rules of the Insider Club. Not the rules in the Constitution. Not the rules in the legislative handbook. The real rules. The rules that say, don't embarrass the donors. Don't reveal the favors. Don't show the public how the sausage is made. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Ordinary people follow rules. They wait in line. They fill out the forms. They pay fines. They play by the book. But political insiders? They write their own exceptions. They bend the system until it fits their needs. They treat democracy like a negotiation, not a responsibility. So when Mamdani spoke, the outrage wasn't about what he said. It was about who heard it. The public wasn't supposed to hear the script. They were only supposed to see the performance. And now that the performance has cracked, now that the backstage machinery has been exposed, the question becomes, what else have they been hiding? The moment Mamdani said the quiet part out loud, you could almost feel the tension shift. Because here's the thing about political insiders, they don't fear opponents. They don't fear debate. They fear exposure. Their entire survival depends on a delicate ecosystem of relationships, lobbyists who write the talking points, donors who write the checks, consultants who write the strategy. Each part is connected. Each part protects the other. And above all, each part relies on one sacred rule: don't reveal the arrangement. So when Mamdani pulled the curtain back, even a little, he didn't just make a political point, he violated the unwritten contract that keeps the entire class afloat. Think about it. Lobbyists survive because elected officials pretend they are just advocates, not shadow decision-makers. Donors survive because politicians pretend funding has no influence. Party strategists survive because everyone pretends candidates make independent choices. These are not lies told to the public. These are lies told within the elite circle to reassure each other that the system is stable, predictable, controllable. And Mamdani shattered that illusion. That's why the reaction was instant. Statements from party leadership suddenly dropped with carefully crafted language, miscommunication, taken out of context, inaccurate characterization. It was cleanup mode, pure and simple. Not because what he said was false, but because they couldn't afford people thinking it was true. Then came the think tank surrogates. You know the type, well-dressed, professionally calm, appearing on cable panels with phrases like irresponsible rhetoric or undermining institutional trust. These are the system's firefighters. Their job isn't policy, it's narrative control. They step in when the public starts paying attention to something the establishment doesn't want on the table. But the real panic wasn't on the record. It was the anonymous quotes. Suddenly, unnamed senior officials were calling Mamdani reckless, dangerous, even uninformed. Classic tactics. When the establishment wants to punish someone without leaving fingerprints, they leak. Because leaking allows them to scold without engaging. It allows them to delegitimize the critic without revealing the machinery behind the criticism. We've seen this pattern before. When whistleblowers speak, the system rarely debates their claims. It debates their character. When Edward Snowden exposed mass surveillance, the story wasn't why is the government spying on everyone? It was, is Snowden a traitor? When Representative Barbara Lee was the lone vote against the 2001 AUMF, the story wasn't about endless war, it was about whether she was naive. When Tulsi Gabbard criticized foreign policy orthodoxy, she was immediately labeled fringe. This is how power defends itself, not with facts, but with intimidation. So the question isn't, did the establishment disagree with Mamdani? The real question is, why were they so desperate to shut him down? Because Mamdani didn't just offer criticism. He disrupted the narrative cycle. The cycle where politicians pretend decisions emerge from open debate, where parties pretend to represent public interest, where institutions pretend to be neutral arbiters. The truth is, narrative is power. And the people who control the narrative control the boundaries of public imagination. Mamdani blew a hole straight through those boundaries. Look at the visual symbolism of the moment. Leaders rushing to issue clarifications. Spokespeople repeating scripted lines like they'd been handed emergency cue cards. Lawmakers looking visibly uncomfortable when asked direct questions. That wasn't confidence. That was fear, fear of losing control of their own story. Because once the public starts questioning backroom deals, they start questioning everything. Why certain bills never reach the floor. Why budget priorities always benefit the same industries. Why foreign policy never reflects public opinion. Why both parties agree on issues no voter ever asked for. This is the nightmare scenario for insiders, a population that suddenly sees the strings. And if this moment caused such visible panic, what happens when more people start pulling on those strings? To understand why Mamdani's exposure hit so hard, you have to understand the ecosystem he threatened. Because politics doesn't happen on the Senate floor. It doesn't happen in hearings. It doesn't happen in press conferences. Those are the performances. The real decisions, the ones that shape budgets, foreign policy, housing laws, policing, and your day-to-day life, happen in a completely different universe. A universe built on back channels, exclusive dinners, donor retreats, consultant briefings, and quiet phone calls that never show up on any official record. This isn't chaos. It's not improvisation. It's a highly structured backroom economy, where influence is the currency and access is the reward. And what Mamdani did, intentionally or not, was name the architecture of that economy. Start with the off-record dinners. These are not casual social gatherings. They are deliberately crafted spaces where donors, lobbyists, and lawmakers can speak freely without reporters or staff present. Real estate developers lay out their concerns. Foreign policy lobbyists outline their priorities. Financial institutions explain their market needs. None of this is illegal. That's the point. It all happens in a gray zone, not corrupt enough to be prosecuted, but not transparent enough to be democratic. Then there are the donor summits. These events are not fundraisers, they are strategy sessions. Think tanks present research designed to justify predetermined positions. Consultants present polling designed to push candidates in specific directions. Lobbyists present policy briefs that conveniently resemble future legislation. The public never sees these conversations, but the outcomes are felt everywhere. In your rent, in your taxes, in your healthcare bills, in the wars your country fights. And the most important thing to understand is this: votes are shaped long before bills reach the floor. By the time a bill is introduced, most major decisions have already been negotiated. Take AIPAC, for example, one of the most influential foreign policy advocacy groups in the country. Their power isn't in the money they donate, it's in the bipartisan pressure they maintain. They secure commitments behind closed doors, well before any public debate. By the time a foreign aid package appears on C-SPAN, the outcome is already predetermined. Or look at New York politics. Real estate carve-outs have become so common that they barely register as news anymore. Developers meet with lawmakers privately to discuss growth, and somehow, those same developers later receive tax breaks, rezonings, or loopholes embedded deep in housing legislation. The public hears about market incentives, but no one hears about the meeting that produced the incentive. Defense contractors? Their influence is practically a textbook example. They spread contracts across districts so no member of Congress wants to cut the budget. Then they host private briefings and security dinners explaining why, conveniently, the Pentagon needs more planes, more missiles, more bases, more everything. By the time the National Defense Authorization Act comes up for a vote, the narrative has been sealed. Voting against it means weakness. Who sealed that narrative? Not voters. Not soldiers. Lobbyists. This is the organized secrecy Mamdani is trying to expose. And the emotional betrayal here is obvious. The public is told that politics is messy but honest. That lawmakers compromise because democracy requires it. That these decisions reflect the will of the people. But in reality, the will of the people barely enters the room. Because the room isn't open to you. That's the ideological core of this chapter. Democracy becomes transactional when power is centralized in rooms the public cannot enter, cannot see, and cannot question. And that brings us to the real threat Mamdani poses to the establishment. He didn't just criticize the system, he named the rooms. He named the spaces where power actually moves. And once you identify the room, you can start asking who's inside it, and who isn't. What makes this moment so powerful, and so threatening to the political class, is that Mamdani didn't introduce a new idea. He articulated a feeling millions of Americans have carried for years but haven't had the language, the platform, or the political courage to express. His exposure didn't create distrust. It simply aligned with a distrust that was already boiling beneath the surface. Let's be honest, faith in American institutions is collapsing at a historic rate. This isn't speculation, it's measurable. Gallup polling now shows Americans' trust in Congress hovering near single digits. Trust in the Supreme Court is at its lowest point in 50 years. Trust in news media? Essentially non-existent. And what happens when every institution that claims to protect you seems more interested in protecting itself? People stop believing the performance. That's why Mamdani's words hit so hard. Because they didn't sound like political rhetoric, they sounded like confirmation. Confirmation that the system people suspected was rigged, actually is. And that the elites who promised transparency were, in reality, performing transparency while managing secrecy behind the scenes. This is why his message cuts across political identities. It's not left frustration or right frustration. It's human frustration. It's the universal experience of watching your rent skyrocket, your groceries double in price, your medical bills suffocate you, while politicians, miraculously, never feel any of that pressure themselves. They have time for donor dinners, but not for urgent housing debates. They have time to negotiate tax incentives for developers, but not to negotiate a break for working families. They can afford to hide favors. The average American can't afford to hide from their own bills. And this disconnect, this canyon between the political class and the people they claim to represent, is the emotional foundation of this moment. Mamdani named something the public already understood. The system isn't malfunctional. It's precisely functional. It works the way it was built to work, efficiently delivering benefits to power, shielding elites from consequences, and leaving ordinary families to fight inflation, debt, housing shortages, and stagnant wages on their own. Just look at the national mood. Populist sentiment is rising across both parties. Democrats are increasingly skeptical of corporate influence and foreign policy hawks. Republicans are increasingly skeptical of federal agencies and political elites. Independents, now the fastest growing political identity in the country, are skeptical of everyone. People aren't apathetic. They are paying close attention. They are questioning. They are angry, not because politics is complicated, but because the consequences of political decisions are landing directly on their backs. And so when Mamdani speaks about backroom deals, it doesn't sound exotic or shocking. It sounds normal. It sounds like what people already suspected, that decisions about war, housing, police funding, public spending, and foreign aid are shaped by interests that never show up on a ballot. That's the ideological power of this moment. Mamdani didn't invent distrust. He validated it. He gave it structure. He said out loud what the public has been thinking quietly. The system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. For them, not for you. And this is where the panic becomes visible. Because once public suspicion lines up with political truth-telling, insiders lose control of the narrative. Suddenly, rushed statements appear. Suddenly, defensive interviews surface. Suddenly, politicians who barely speak to the press feel obligated to clarify their positions. That's not leadership. That's fear. And the thing about fear is that it grows, especially when the public begins demanding more answers. If you zoom out from this single confrontation, this one moment where Mamdani dragged the backroom machinery into the light, you start to see the real stakes. Because what he exposed isn't just a scandal. It's a structure. And structures don't collapse quietly. They crack slowly, then suddenly, all at once. The truth is painfully simple: power concentrates, democracy dilutes. That is the natural direction of every political system unless the public actively fights the gravitational pull of elite control. A handful of people, donors, lobbyists, consultants, party insiders, billionaire influencers, end up shaping the entire political landscape while ordinary citizens are left negotiating grocery bills, medical debt, and rent hikes that feel like monthly punishments. This is the real conflict Mamdani symbolized. It's not left versus right. It's not progressive versus moderate. It's the oldest political fight in human history, those who benefit from the system versus those who pay for it. Look at the evidence. Every year, the military budget grows like a living organism that can't stop feeding, no matter who sits in the Oval Office. Meanwhile, domestic services, education funding, housing support, community programs shrink, stall, or get cut entirely. The message is consistent. Money is unlimited for war, but never available for working families. Or look at billionaire donor influence. Just a tiny cluster of megadonors, maybe 20 families at most, fuel major PACs that shape national elections, policy priorities, even judicial appointments. They don't vote more than you do, but their checkbooks vote harder. Their preferences overshadow millions of ordinary voices because the system rewards wealth, not participation. Then there are police and patrol unions, some of the most powerful political entities in city-level politics. They wield enormous influence over budgets, labor contracts, and disciplinary policies. They can pressure mayors, intimidate reformers, and even sway public opinion through strategic media campaigns. In New York, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, the story is the same. Unions protect their own interests with more force than any elected official protects the public interest. And what's the common thread across all of these examples? The people with power fight for discretion. The people without power fight for survival. The average American is battling for stability, stable income, stable housing, stable healthcare, stable safety. Meanwhile, political elites are battling for something entirely different: the ability to make decisions without being questioned. Discretion is the luxury of power. Transparency is the burden of the powerless. That's why truth-tellers get punished. That's why insiders panic when someone breaks the script. And that's why Mamdani's moment hit with the force of a political earthquake, because it forced the public to confront the reality that transparency feels radical only because secrecy became normal. So ask yourself, what does accountability look like in a system that punishes people for telling the truth? If speaking honestly about backroom deals leads to backlash, what does that say about the health of the democracy itself? And why does transparency, something that should be the bare minimum standard, suddenly feel revolutionary? Why does it feel dangerous? Why does it feel like a threat to the people who claim they are serving you? Maybe it's because, for the first time in a long time, the curtain moved. And for just a moment, the public got a glimpse of how much is hiding behind it. The agreements, the interests, the machinery of power that was never designed to be seen. And now that the public has seen that first glimpse, the question becomes: how long until the curtain is pulled again? How long until someone else steps forward? How long until the cracks turn into collapse? Because this wasn't a one-time exposure. This was the first crack. And the establishment knows more are coming.